I'm going to do a strength test. If you haven't been watching me restore this lovely guitar, then I suggest you do. It's a thing of beauty. And at some point in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have to glue this bridge, currently on a support block, onto the front of the guitar. Now originally when I got this, it was quite damaged here because the original bridge had been torn off and there were quite a lot of bits of tear out. And I had my doubts that I was going to get a strong glue joint just gluing straight onto the damaged surface. So I filled the middle with a patch of spruce, but the wings, rather than try and put a delicate inlay in there, which might not have been particularly strong, and because the tear out wasn't so bad there, I just filled the wings with a mixture of spruce dust and Titebond. And I've realised, and there have been comments on the videos, that this might not be the strongest joint. It's only on the wings, but nevertheless the bridge is going to take quite a lot of strain and I need it to be as strong as possible. So I'm going to do a strength test because I want to know whether me using a Titebond filler has compromised the potential strength of the joint on the bridge. So what I've done, I've prepared some small pieces of wood here, and onto these I'm going to be gluing a longer piece of wood, and then following the very fine example of Matthias Wandel in his strength videos, I'm going to see how much force it takes to break the joints apart. So what I've got here is I've just got plain wood that is actually planed. And that will be my control experiment, if you like. In theory, that should be the strongest joint. And in fact, I've hedged my bets here. I've numbered these according to what I think beforehand will be the strongest joints. The second one, I've milled some grooves in this, some little millimetre grooves, to simulate the sort of tear out I was getting on the face of the guitar. So there's going to be a lot of extra glue on that, and it filling some spaces, but according to one of Matthias's videos, that might not compromise the strength too much. It might be that I should have left the wings of the bridge unfilled. We'll see. Number 3, I've put a thin layer of glue on that. This is actually this was originally part of a joint. I tried to glue this onto a sheet of glass, thinking that when it was dry it would just pop off easily. In fact, surprising to me, it proved a very strong joint. It took a lot of pressure and in fact a hammer to remove this from the sheet of glass when it had dried. But what it has given me is a nice thin layer of glue just soaked into the surface of the wood. I've just rubbed it down with a bit of 240 grit sandpaper and I've scratched the surface, I've scored the surface with a craft knife. So that's number 3. Number 4 is the same tear out as number 2, but I filled it with the mixture of Titebond and spruce dust that I used on the front of the guitar, and then I've sanded it down flush to 240 grit. So this one here is the interesting one because this is the front of my guitar at the wings. This is the front of the guitar in the middle where I've put the patch on the surface of the guitar. This one is how it is at the wings. Is there much of a difference between 1 and 4? But we've got some other examples as well. This one is similar to number 3. This is the thin layer of glue from clamping against a glass plate and then snapping it off. And I've sanded down to 240 grit, but unlike this one I haven't scratched the surface, so this is effectively sealed. We're not going to get any glue seeping into the surface of this one, I don't think. So will that compromise the strength of the bond? This is a wood to Titebond join. And then finally, this one has a really thick layer of glue. I just put glue all over it and then just let it dry. This one took a long time to dry. It was really surprising. It took over 24 hours to fully dry. You could see it drying around the edges, and it was gradually getting more and more into the centre, and it took a full 24 hours to dry because it was just a thick layer of glue open to the atmosphere. There was no clamping, there was no sandwiching it between two pieces of wood. The surface of this I have tried to flatten with sandpaper, but I've polished it to 2500 grit. I want to give this a really smooth surface, completely impermeable to fresh glue, and hopefully create the worst possible joint. But we'll see. This for me is the interesting one. Can Titebond adhere to set Titebond, a really thick layer with no chance of it soaking into the wood? So those are the pieces of the wood. Next stage is to put the same dollop of glue on all of these, try to get the same thickness of glue on all of them, and clamp them up, leave them overnight. So, a little blob of glue in the middle, spread it all around. And clamp. And I'm going to try to just do, just going to try to keep the same amount of clamping pressure on all of them. Sort of like that. I've got different size clamps, but hopefully I can get it fairly consistent. So that's the first one. On to the next few. So here's the setup for the test. I've got my jointed piece of wood and I've got it clamped against this rather solid lump of sapele. And I've got my bathroom scales here onto which I will place the car jack, and we'll raise it up and see what sort of force is needed to break the joint. And I've got my iPhone to record the displayed force or weight. The sapele is clamped against the edge of the desk using the vise, and I've packed out the vise to make sure we've got a good pressure here, that the vise isn't being twisted and wrecked, because I've already broken the other vise on this bench. But more importantly, I've got it packed out underneath so that there's no way this sapele is going to move. As long as the bench is rigid, which I think it is, this is pretty solid and will withstand any force we put on this. So the first item, this is the control experiment. This is in theory the strongest joint. It's just wood on wood and Titebond, of course. So let's see what pressure is needed. Oh, hardly anything. Was that 20 kilos? We'll find out. Joint number 2. My suspicion is this should be fairly strong. It's the surface that's been milled with a load of tear out, a load of grooves, but it's still wood against wood, but possibly with glue taking up space. I've been careful to make sure the wood's at the same height so that we've got exactly the same leverage. So let's crank this one up, see what we get. Here we go. 10 kilos, 14, 15, it's starting to go, 17, 18, 19, 20, that looked to be about the same as the previous one. Number 3, this is the thin layer of dried glue on the one surface that's been scratched, scored to enable penetration of the new Titebond going on. So here we go. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, no, not quite, 19, I think it might be going, 20, we hit 20 yet? 20, 21, 22, 23, what's going on here? 24, wow. Right, the joint hasn't actually broken at all. That's interesting. It's the wood that's broken. This half of the joint is still intact. So there's a result. This is the one that I've got a real interest in, because this is the joint that is similar to what I've got on the surface of my guitar. I've milled out some 1mm grooves in the surface of the wood, and then I filled them in with a mixture of spruce and Titebond and then glued over the top. So let's see what this one looks like. I've realised, by the way, there's quite a lot of parallax on the angle of the iPhone, so the reading that you'll be seeing in the iPhone video is different to what I'm seeing here. In fact, I haven't got these scales properly set, but I'm going to carry on as I have been, so at least the data's consistent. So here we go. 10 kilos, 14, 15, 17, 19, it's going, 20, 21, yeah, I think that was about 21. And again the wood broke. So number 5. Now this is the first one that really goes some way to answer, will Titebond stick to Titebond? Because this is a thin layer of Titebond sanded down to 240 grit, no scratching of the surface. So it's a proper Titebond to Titebond joint. So let's see how we get on. That's 9, 10 kilos, 11, 12, 13, 15 kilos, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, this is a strong joint, 22, I reckon 22 for that one. And it is the glue that's gone by the look of it. That broke cleanly, none of the wood came away. So I think that tells us something about the strength of the joint. The glue appears to be weaker than the wood. And finally, number 6. This is in theory the worst case scenario because we've got a really thick layer of Titebond and I've polished it to 2500 grit. So there's no scoring of the surface, there's very little for the glue to grab hold of. It's just purely down to how well Titebond bonds to Titebond. So let's go. Starting to bite. So that's 2 kilos, 5 kilos, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kilos, 13, 15, that feels 17, 18, no, maybe not, I think it's okay, 19, 20, 21, this is a strong joint, 22, 23, 24, I think it's going to go 25, will we get to 25? Yes, I think this is the strongest. 26, 27, 28, yeah, I think I can hear something, 28, yeah, there we go. And the wood broke. Here's how the joints broke. So what have we learned? Well, if the question is, will Titebond adhere to Titebond? Yes. By far the strongest joint was the one with lashings of Titebond, and I'd even polished the surface to try and make it difficult. And the weakest joints were the traditional joints with just plain wood on both surfaces. So I don't know whether this is controversial in any way, but it does appear to turn conventional wisdom on its head. So make of that what you will. All I'll say is, before you all go out and start sealing your joints with dry Titebond, bear in mind that there was always one surface that was just plain wood. So for me, it means I haven't compromised the strength of my guitar bridge. For the rest of you, make of it what you will. Thank you very much. And one more thing, I recently hit 1,000 subscribers, yay! And I want more. So go subscribe, click like, share the video, do all those things, and thank you very much.